No, you gotta turn it up.
Can you hear me in the back? All right. Okay, I'm sorry for the late start. We had some problems with our reservation. But let's get started. And I think we'll keep requesting more chairs as more people come in. I know the parking is really bad here too, so folks are running late. But this is an amazing turnout. First of all, I want to thank Rachel, who's over in the corner. Rachel is responsible for all the labor that actually went into making this happen. So applause for Rachel. One other thing, we have a literature table over there between the doors. There's literature from the organization, the program that I'm the director of, but also literature from some of our speakers, as well as literature from community groups who work on racial justice issues. So please, if you haven't already taken a look over there, go through, take literature with you, share it with folks. I've left also my business card over there. If you want to follow up with me and talk to me, feel free to do so. How we're going to do this today is we have 3 speakers. I've asked them to speak for about 10 minutes apiece. That way we should get through this before the 11 o'clock hour, which is when I know a lot of students and faculty might have to leave for a class period, although our objective is to make this so compelling that you will stay here, and I'm sorry to those faculty miss your class. So that's our goal. But that's how we want to do it. And then we're going to have Q&A. And given the large turnout today, which is so beautiful, we can actually extend past 11:30 for Q&A. So if that need is there, we can fill that need. Okay, so my name is Chad Kautzer. I'm an assistant professor of philosophy at CU Denver. I'm also the director of the social justice minor, which is an interdisciplinary program in the CLAS college here. I put some literature over there. This is the blue sheet. If you're interested in that, please come talk to me. We're excited this semester to be able to launch a $1,000 scholarship. I don't know of any other scholarship like this for students, for social justice minors who are involved in community activism. So to support those students, we have a $1,000 scholarship. We have flyers about that over there. Please take one, please share it with students. I actually had introductory remarks written up, and they got lost in the shuffle of setting up. So I will say just a few more things. One, events like this are happening all over the country. I know that later today in New York City, one of my philosophical heroes, Cornel West, is doing an event on Ferguson and racial justice in New York City. It's happening all over the place. And obviously, the shooting of Michael Brown by the police in Ferguson not that long ago was the impetus for that discussion. But we all know, most of us in this room know, that that discussion has been going on for a long, long time. Too long, in fact. And what I want to do with this event, and what I ask the speakers to do, is not just address police-community relations and racism, but also talk about white supremacy. And that can be very controversial to some, because you're actually naming a system of power, privilege, and oppression that operates in everyday social institutions. And so it's not some specific event over there, or some one shooting and killing over there, but it's a system that pervades all of our social institutions. And I wanted to name that in this panel, this discussion, and talk about that. And I also want to make a connection between what's happening here and what's happening in Ferguson and what's happening in New York and what's happening all over the country with the protests that are happening by students in Jefferson County, because they are connected. And can I just ask for applause for the students who... Okay, if you don't know what's going on in Jefferson County, those students are walking out over proposed changes, a review committee, to the teaching of AP history in Jefferson County schools. And though this is a coordinated effort nationwide, And the history that is being challenged is the history that is exposing the history of white supremacy in the United States. The president of the school board said that he doesn't want his children, students, coming out of those classes and feeling like they're a member of an oppressor race, an oppressor gender, and living in an oppressive country. And so they're stipulating that they want the history to reflect patriotism, support of the free enterprise system, and this is what's so significant about the student protesters, and to not condone or in any way show in a positive light civil disorder or civil disobedience. And so the students responded by walking out of class. It's beautiful. Why this is so important is the president of the school board said this, and he said, I don't want them to feel bad. And it's true, we don't want people to feel bad. It's sometimes called white guilt. White guilt is not useful. Whites learning about the history of white supremacy creates a responsibility, not because of something that ancestors did in the past, but because of the legacy of white supremacy today. And so with that knowledge of the history of white supremacy and its operations today, students then have an obligation to do something, to work with others to dismantle white supremacy in all social institutions, including the criminal justice system and the police. Now, I'll say one last thing before I introduce our speakers, which is yesterday, this event was flagged by the police. And so I had to talk to the police about this event and convince them not to staff it with police officers. Now I got a call from the university here, the office next door that books the rooms. And on behalf of the police, they wanted to know everything we were going to say in this event, and if we were going to have images, AV, they wanted to know what those images were. Now I refused. I said, no, I'm not going to tell you what's in this event, and I'm not going to tell you what images are going to be shown. I didn't know what images were going to be shown, but it was none of their business. And the whole thing was set up where the police were now questioning. I had to defend this event as an event that wasn't dangerous to the campus community. And that is part of the problem. The fact that just talking about white supremacy, talking about police brutality, is a flag to the police that this is a dangerous event, is itself evidence of the problem of white supremacy in this country. Now they decided that it would be. I convinced them that it would be a PR disaster for the police to show up at this event. And they agreed and said that they weren't going to show up at this event. But the fact that it happened should all remind us that, one, if the police are calling, we're talking about something important. And two, if they think it's dangerous, then we have a lot of work to do. And this event is one contribution along that path of the work that we need to do. Okay, we have three speakers today. Glenn Morris, Cheryl Matias, and Alex Landau. I'm just going to give you the very short introduction to them, and I've asked them to speak a little bit more about themselves. Glenn Morris is going to go first. Many of you know him. He's a political science professor here at CU Denver. Cheryl Matias is also at CU Denver. She's in the School of Education. And Alex Landau is a communication major and a social justice minor at this institution. So with that, please join me in welcoming Glenn Morris.
Good morning. Good to see you. As Chad said, my name is Glenn Morris. I'm from the Shawnee Nation. I teach political science here, and I operate a center called the Fourth World Center for the Study of Indigenous Law and Politics over in the new building on the 3rd floor. Feel free to come by. We examined the operation actually of white supremacy around the world against Native people. Not just white supremacy, actually. It's all kinds of supremacy, but in this country we certainly look at white supremacy as it impacts Indigenous peoples. And there's flyers back there for an event that we're going to have, a series of events actually, a week from this coming Monday, Indigenous Peoples Day. It's kind of a countermeasure to the white supremacist Columbus Day. So we hope that you'll all come and learn a little bit more about the history of this hemisphere that you never learned from your 6th grade teacher. I welcome the opportunity to be part of this event because this is a conversation that happens all too seldomly. And I prepared a few remarks that I'll start off with. And 10 minutes is really just about enough time to be provocative and to hopefully inspire some real conversation. But the things that I wanted to talk about, I told Chad this when he asked me to participate in this event, was I'd really like to talk about white supremacy as it involves Indigenous peoples, because this entire country is founded upon a notion of white supremacy. That you can go to somebody else's house and discover it. Mm-hmm. And by virtue of that discovery, gain title to it. That's a nice trick. I'll try it. Over in Cherry Hills, maybe. But we're also talking about Ferguson. But if we only talk about Ferguson in the character of Michael Brown, or in the character of the officer who shot him, his name Darren Wilson, mm-hmm. then we miss the picture. Because Michael Brown didn't live in a vacuum, and Darren Wilson didn't operate as a police officer in a vacuum. They operate in a system, in a structure. And we all know the data that's been exposed about Ferguson in the spotlight of this shooting, about the city's population being almost 70% African American. But 94% of the police department is white. We know that 6 out of the 7 school board members in Ferguson are white. That 5 of the 6 city council people are white. That the mayor is white. Is that a coincidence? I think it's not a coincidence. And so it's important for us to examine the question. So if Darren Wilson is fired, let's say he goes on trial and he's convicted and he goes to prison. Let's say that the police chief, Thomas Jackson, gets fired. Is that the solution? Is that going to prevent there being shootings in Jennings or the other surrounding communities? I think not. And I want to invoke this theory that's known as racial cartels. And that is just like other cartels in economics, oil cartels or sugar cartels, railroad cartels. That is a kind of conglomeration of interests that work toward a common goal. And in this instance, they use political and economic and social collaboration toward a particular end. And so I brought a series of maps, because this is not my theory. Daria Rothmeyer from University of Southern California Law School just released a new book on this whole theory called Reproducing Racism. And so she defines racial cartels as groups in which members agree to artificially fix wages, property values, political power, and other price-like analogs by restricting supply, dividing up markets, or colluding to achieve other commercial conditions. Well, what does this have to do with Michael Brown getting shot? Here's a map of St. Louis. And it's divided by race. And these green areas, that's where the black people live. And these blue areas, those are the predominantly white neighborhoods. And you can see that this is a very polarized city. And I could put a map of Denver up too. But St. Louis is put Chicago up too. And Detroit and New York. But we're talking about St. Louis here. So we see this bifurcation of St. Louis. Now George Will or John Boehner or other Republicans, they would say, oh, this is just a consequence of personal preference. People's personal housing choices. They just live where they want to live. But Rothmeyer says that this is not the consequence of that. This is the consequence of the operation of cartels, of race-based cartels. She would perhaps say this, based on white supremacy. I'll say that. And she says this doesn't happen just from individual, personal, or even just private choices. This is a consequence of state action. And so I have another series of maps about St. Louis that I think are extremely, I can do this, instructive. About how this system of white supremacy has operated in St. Louis for the past 100 years. And this is a series of maps about white flight from St. Louis. So in this map you have these white dots where European American families are arriving, settling. The red dots are where they're leaving, and the black dots are where black families are moving in. So from this map, from the early 20th century, we see some change about to happen in the inner city. As blacks move in, you see the red dots again indicate white flight. And where are they fleeing to? They're fleeing to the burbs of St. Louis, St. Charles County. And so as time progresses in the 60s, 70s to 80s, the flight becomes more pronounced. So Ferguson is about right here. Then we have another series of maps that really prove Rothmeyer's point. And that's about the operation of these cartels. So the way that this happens in St. Louis, and it happened all over the country, it certainly happened here in Denver, that it began by city fathers, there were men, designating certain communities as being the black areas in town, and establishing zoning regulations to ensure that realtors would only sell to blacks in these neighborhoods by law. By law. Eventually, this method becomes illegal. But that doesn't stop realtors. And so this is a 1916 zoning ordinance in which the city of St. Louis tries to zone by law where blacks can live. Realtors then, once this gets stricken down by the Supreme Court, say, well, okay, the city can't do it, but we can do it. We're a private entity. We're not subject to the 14th Amendment of the Constitution. We can do it. So realtors began this cartel, and this is what Rothmeyer says about the operation of cartels. That it doesn't necessarily need to be formalized, although sometimes it is. There's just an understanding. And the understanding for the realtors in St. Louis was that if you sold to blacks in the wrong area, you would lose your real estate license. Or you would be ostracized in the industry. And so that's the way that this operated for decades in St. Louis. What happens after World War II is that we have a collusion between the Roosevelt administration and the Federal Housing Administration to decide a couple of things. One is that the Realtor Association begins to say, we need to, in the areas where we sell houses to whites, have parts of the contract, are called racially restricted covenants, that prohibit white people from selling their property to blacks or other people of color, or even Jews in some cases. And so these yellow areas are areas with restrictive covenants. So you see, this is the black area that has been designated by the realtors. These are the areas with restricted covenants that prevent the black community from growing. Now, I'm going to have to abbreviate some of this, and we can talk about some of this in the discussion. So what happens after that? During the Depression and after World War II, is that the Federal Housing Administration, the federal government, your federal government, colludes then with the realtors to begin, and banks, to decide which areas of the community are worthy of loans and which are not. This is a process that many of you know as redlining. And so it's called redlining for a reason. Here's the map of St. Louis. The green areas are the predominantly white areas. And they get the green light from the banks and the FHA for new home mortgage loans. The blue areas are kind of, they're still okay. The yellow areas are in flux. They're kind of sketchy. And the red areas, the red-lined areas, the black and Latino areas, are the ones that are off the board in terms of loans. So this is the way that Rothmeyer and other analysts in this field, they say this is the way that cartels operate. And the reason that this becomes so important in St. Louis, in a community like Ferguson, which is mostly a rental market, is that wealth in this society is, for most people, not the 1%ers, but for most people and most white people, is held in the form of your home equity. That's the money that your parents or you leverage for student loans, to buy a business, to do other kinds of things that make you economically upwardly mobile. But if you can't buy a home because you're locked out of the market, that's an operation of white supremacy. That's part of the cartel that Rothmeyer is talking about. And this happens in education, it happens in housing, it happens in employment, it happens in the criminal justice system. I recommend, if you haven't read it, I'm sure most of you have, Michelle Alexander's book, The New Jim Crow. She talks about the same operation of that cartel system with regard to how did Michael Brown get shot in the first place? It was the operation of a criminal justice system that incarcerates black men, especially his age, young black men, at a rate 10 times that of a white man his same age. And so there's a whole lot more to talk about with regard to this. I didn't even get to the Indian stuff. Good thing. It wouldn't shut me up. But I just wanted to put this on the table about the operation of racial cartels And the notion that this isn't, the idea of white supremacy, first of all, we're not talking about guys in sheets or neo-Nazis, skinheads standing on the corner. These are bankers. These are university administrators. These are penologists and governors of the state making decisions about who goes to prison and who doesn't, about who gets a house and who doesn't, about who gets to go to the university and who doesn't. And they're based on race. Now they'll deny that. And so part of the conversation that we're going to have today is about how we unpack that, how we make the invisible visible, expose it, and overcome it. Thank you.
Okay, we're just going to take a second. Alex is going to come up next, and he's going to pull up some images. Okay, we're going to switch orders. Cheryl Matias is going to be next. So she's going to set up her laptop for some slides. So just give us 1 second.
What? Is the sound working?
Did you mention that I walked out? Did you mention no?
While I'm setting up, can you all hear me?
Yes.
I used to be a classroom teacher in LA and New York, so I'm loud as heck. And I'm from LA, so I'm really loud as heck. Let's see if the sound is working with me. Messed up speakers, but other than that, we're ready to roll. My name is Cheryl Matias. I'm an assistant professor at the School of Education and Human Development here at University of Colorado, Denver. We just opened an undergrad pipeline, so those of you that are interested in education should look into that. Oftentimes we do teach graduate school, the master's and doctoral level, as well as an urban community teacher education program. Wow, get blown up, hold on.
Sure, you don't want your mic?
Oh, I will.
Oh, okay.
I'm short, but I'm loud.
I'll set it up here, and if you want to take it freely.
I'm just
then-
setting up, that's
Okay.
fine. So, I can barely reach that. That's why I'm wearing 6-inch shoes. So those of you that are interested in education, there's various routes. You do not always have to be a classroom teacher to be an educator. So think about the possibilities. I am in the program of Educational Foundations that has a pipeline program in the undergrad. So those of you that are interested, you can Google my name, Cheryl Matias, and you'll find my information. With that said, I want to tell everyone that I do, and I see my colleagues, I just give a shout out to Educational Foundations. Some of the professors are in the back there. Can I have Dr. Espinosa just wave and all of that? Thank you. So I just wanted to say, I study the emotionality of whiteness. Specifically, I used a feminist of color approach to deconstruct the emotionality of whiteness, specifically in urban teacher education. I think a lot of the things that Glenn just spoke about and misunderstandings of race comes from a miseducation, to use Lauryn Hill's words, right? Here's just a case in point. If you ask someone, even a neo-Nazi, even a KKK member, if they are racist, they will say no. They just believe that whites are superior. So if the misconstruction and misunderstanding of race continues to prevail, we're going to continue to see life-threatening issues like this. It's beyond stereotypes. It's a miseducation of the entire America. So with that, I'd ask you, before I talk a little bit more about emotionality of whiteness, I do want to ask you to join with me on a visual and auditory look at the anatomy of hate.
Hide my head, I a very, very children waiting for the day they feel good. Happy birthday, happy birthday. And I feel the way that every child should sit and listen, sit and listen. Went to school and I was very nervous. No one knew me, no one knew me. Hello teacher, tell me what's my lesson? Look right through me.
Thank you for your indulgence. Sometimes things can be better said without a single word. I always tell my students that being a teacher is just being a DJ. You just got to keep the party going. But now that I thoroughly depressed you, I do want to articulate. So what about this? What is the underlying root of white supremacy? I think of it like this. People say racism is the problem. Racism is the disease. Racism is not the disease. It is the symptom. White supremacy is this disease that manifests in racism. So we think of it structurally. We see white supremacy as this overarching structure that supports racism and race-based practices, right? But there has to be something that maintains white supremacy, and that is the issues of whiteness. Oftentimes I'm asked, or often people respond to my studies on whiteness as I must hate white people. And I'm going to say right now that's bullshit. Because how can someone say they hate women if they study women's studies? How can someone say they hate people of color if they study race and ethnic study? The processes of whiteness is such that when I say I study whiteness, everyone is afraid that I hate white people, which is absolutely absurd. So I want to make a distinction between whiteness and white people. They are not the same. Whiteness is an ideology. It becomes the social constructions. It becomes the behaviors. In fact, I'm going to talk about it becomes the very emotions that support a white supremacist society. I'm saying, and those white folks, of course, are categorized under the racial category that benefits from a system of white supremacy. So there's a difference. I'll just say this. Whiteness can inhabit the minds of people of color, albeit a different process of survival. But white people tend to often encapsulate whiteness because of how it works in its invisibility, right? So let me talk about emotionality because it's very important to this whole issue about human lives. I often show pictures in my class about deaths that are taking place in LA, the beating of the African-American woman by CHP, and you see other, here's a good one. In the 90s, JonBenet Ramsey, right? We all know JonBenet. She was a little girl, a little white girl who was killed here in Colorado, right? All her face was plastered everywhere, yet at the same time there were murders of young female girls. Shanice Iverson, I think her name was. A little black girl who was raped and killed on videotape in Las Vegas. When I talk about emotionality, we watch how the public outcries in two different ways. When they saw JonBenet Ramsey and heard her story, all of a sudden the heart came out. The heart felt pity. The heart realized a human life was lost. But with the case of Shanice Iverson, her parents, her father, were indicted, saying he was a bad parent not watching her while she went to the restroom. And the society responded by finding other ways to place blame onto the parents and the brother. It was just another life. But according to the public outcry and emotionality, it was only 3/5 of a human life not worthy for the whole time and media coverage that JonBenet Ramsey got. Am I speaking truth? So I do this a lot in work, right? You see a lot of, in education. How many of you watch Dangerous Minds? Okay, don't make me feel old. You watch Dangerous Minds. Okay, there's another one. Hillary Swank, Freedom Riders. Joan Clark's story. And I'm going to even put Sandra Bullock's The Blind Side in there, right? In a lot of those stories, you see white women coming into urban schools of color with students of color, right? They go there and they do what? They rescue, they save these heathen souls, right? This rhetoric has been used, this emotionality has been used over and over to genocide of the indigenous peoples, to how they justify slavery. I'm giving them a chance. I'm giving them opportunities. I'm saving them. And in those stories, you often have a moment in the story when the urban students of color are so mean to the white teacher that she ends up doing what? Emotionally. She ends up crying. And when the white woman weeps, society falls to their knees, like the Pieta in the Vatican, right? So we think about those images and how we categorize, how we realize that emotionality can be racialized. How you feel pity for one person and then not feel the same kind of pity for another person. And that kind of emotionality undergirds the same kind of hate, whether latent or acknowledged, that spurs stereotypes and manifests in very, very deadly ways. I think oftentimes when I talk about emotionality, people try to ignore it, saying in a very patriarchal world that it's nothing more than someone's innate feeling. It's just how you feel. As if our feelings are not structured by a society that we live in, which is absolutely ridiculous. For example, if we all right now, and I put a Sally Struthers commercial of helping and donating to starving African children, and one of you started laughing, let's just say emotionally, one of you started laughing, we would be quick to rectify that emotion. In fact, that is the wrong emotion, quote unquote. So I think it's important to recognize that emotionalities are not just innate. They can be racialized as easy as our identities can be. So it's an important thing. If you want to learn more about this, I did have literature on the side table over there, and I'm running over my 10-minute time. So I definitely want you to take opportunities to grab some of my articles. I have some on sadomasochism and whiteness. All right, some really interesting. And I have a new piece coming out with my doc student about cock-blocking whiteness. Yeah, I go there. I do. You know, if we're going to say it, let's say it right, you know. But definitely take a look at some of my articles there if you're interested, if it sparks your interest. And look into the School of Education. I have my Associate Dean, Dr. Garrison Wade here, some members of the faculty here, Dr. Sheila Shannon here, and our doctoral and master's students here. You definitely could talk to them more about programs and offerings in the School of Ed. So thank you very much.
So we're just going to set up for our third speaker, which is Alex Landau.
I want to first thank everybody for coming out here this afternoon. I know it's not always easy to schedule personal events, and you know, life happens for an afternoon, especially on a Wednesday, so thank you. Let's dive right into it. My name is Alex Landau. I'm currently 25 years old. I'm a communication major. I'm also a social justice minor here on the campus. A little bit about myself. I was adopted when I was 2 days old by a white family. I have a white mother and a white father. I was raised, I spent the majority of my childhood in white communities, Bailey, Conifer, Evergreen. I went to school in Jefferson County, Littleton. So growing up, I never really had a positive identity or really any other identity other than what I picked up from rhetorical sources like media, news, about what black folks looked like, what they engaged in, how the culture was supposed to be taught and exercised in day-to-day living. And on the other hand to that, my parents never had the education coming from, my mom's from Americus, Georgia. My dad grew up in Denver, Colorado, never having the education of what it means to be a person of color in normative white America. Having an understanding that the idea of a post-racial society is a facade. And day-to-day life and experiences for folks of color are inherently different in this community, in every community in the United States, than they are for white people. Growing up, I remember my very first race-based interaction. It happened when I was 4 years old. I don't remember what the altercation was about, but I remember that the child who I was fighting with said, well, sometimes not all white kids like to play with black kids. And I didn't know exactly why it hurt so bad, but I knew that it hurt. I knew that it upset my mom. I knew my mom ran over and grabbed this child up and told him, you don't talk to my son like that. You need to leave. Threw him to the side. But I also have to look at it through the lens of the child who victimized me at that particular point in my life. He was the same age as me, and I don't think he had a clear understanding of what it is he was even saying. Growing up, I finally moved out when I was 18 years old. I moved to the Denver metropolitan area. And this is when things really began to be placed into perspective for me. I really began to understand things that I would engage in growing up, and what that was actually, that there was a word for that, that assimilation is what I was being taught. I remember points when I was growing up where I didn't want to wear shorts, I didn't want to wear short sleeves, I didn't want to have curly hair because the people around me in my environment didn't have curly hair. The people in my environment didn't have the same skin color as me. My parents didn't have the same skin color as me. When we went to the store, I didn't see products that catered to my ethnicity. I have a sister who's 4 years younger than me, and when we had to go get her hair cut or get her hair done, we had to go across town to the other side of Colorado, because, at least to us, because there were no black folks in our community. There weren't places that catered to other ethnicities other than the normative, which is white America. So at 19 years old, I had a very negative interaction with law enforcement. Growing up, I've been pulled over multiple times. I've had other experiences with police that were probably race-based, some that may not have been, but it's irrelevant to what happened that evening. What happened that evening is I was pulled over for an alleged illegal left turn, which proved to be false. I was 19 years old. It was about 1 in the morning. I had a white passenger with me, and I was driving an '84 Lincoln Town Car eastbound up Colfax. If you don't know what a Lincoln Town Car looks like, it's a very old, big body, what would allegedly be called a mobster vehicle back in the times of Goodfellas, The Godfather, etc. So I was pulled to the side of the road, and after exercising my right to ask for a warrant, not in cuffs at the time, I was beaten almost to death. I was aggressively grabbed and stated I didn't have a license, and I was beaten almost to death with fists, a radio, a flashlight. I had a gun put to my head, and then I was laughed at and called a nigger afterwards. This is a photo that I forced the officers to take before I allowed paramedics to proceed with any sort of medical treatment. Now, when we look at what happened to Michael Brown, that is not a new practice. Racism, segregation, excessive force, violence, dehumanization, these are all practices that have been in existence since slavery, and we know that. I think that in the case of Michael Brown, unfortunately, we don't have another side of the story. So we don't have a truth. We don't have a voice to put truth to that power either. So I think that I'm fortunate enough to be able to tell it from the victim's standpoint. And unfortunately, there are community members around this nation who have suffered and endured the same sort of treatment as myself and the same sort of treatment as Michael Brown. And several people that come to mind, Oscar Grant for one, Paul Childs, Alonzo Ashley, Ryan Ronquillo, these are all people who have been killed by law enforcement. And I think that it's sad because these are all people of color who died in a crime. People who did not make it to see 26 years old. And the idea that we're in a post-racial society is simply perpetuated on a daily basis through sources like radio, through sources like television, through magazines, through humor, through day-to-day interactions with folks. And it creates a barrier in cultural competency. And it makes these kinds of interactions acceptable and more taboo. It's okay that I called you a nigger. It's okay that I made a race-based comment because I'm joking, right? That's supposed to be okay. I'm not serious about it. But when I say the new Jim Crow to me, the Jim Crow never left. My mom's from Americus, Georgia. My grandfather was a police officer. My great-grandfather was a police officer. And they tell me the same stories about what happened to me that was going on at that time. It's nothing new. And I think that part of the thing that we need to do as individuals is we need to be more cognizant of the way we communicate with ourselves, our peers, and the people around us. There's absolutely no reason why Michael Brown had to die. There's absolutely no reason why I had to be beaten within inches of my life. And people want to say, well, you should just listen to law enforcement. You should just abide by the rules and everything will be fine. So I should get on the sidewalk and you're going to shoot me to death. You're going to kill me. And I'm sorry, but that is inhumane. You can't tell me to get on the sidewalk or you're going to shoot me an unknown number of times. You're going to send a stray bullet across the street into a building. It's unacceptable. And I think it starts with the blind eye to the progressive track since slavery to modern day. And I think that one thing we need to do is we need to be more cognizant of what we're teaching, not only ourselves but each other. We can't be making comments and then trying to cover them up with humor. We have to understand where our fellow community members are actually coming from, whether you're Black, whether you're Latino, whether you're part of the LGBTQ community, whether you're a woman, it doesn't matter. We need to listen to each other. We need to have an understanding of what hurts and what's acceptable. And when it's unacceptable, who are you to tell me that the way I'm feeling because of what you said is wrong? So I think that it's time, it's way past time. But we are in a more progressive generation, I like to believe, than we were 30, 40, 50, 60 years ago. I like to believe that my colleagues, my companions, and my comrades, my community members alike are on the same page as myself, that a Michael Brown could happen anywhere, anytime, any place. Alonzo Ashley was killed at the zoo at about 4:30 in the afternoon by police. So we are not safe on a college campus. We are not safe in our community. We have to have a proper education before we even leave the house, because there is a stigmatism and there is an image, there is a rhetorical norm for folks of color in the community and the way they're perceived by law enforcement and other individuals in the community, whether they're white, whether they're Black. And the worst part about it, I hate to sidetrack here for a second, but when you were talking about the political hierarchical structure of St. Louis and how in proportionate numbers of race, of political figures who are white versus the community members who are Black. Here in Denver, Colorado, it's the exact opposite. And they try to say that we are in a post-racial area. Police accountability is not a need amongst our departments. And so did the mayor and police chief for St. Louis, or for Ferguson, in post days of what happened. We have a Black police chief, we have a Black mayor, we have a former Black director of the sheriffs, we have a Black manager of safety. So we have a Black president, so we must be in a post-racial society. We're progressive. All that does is further the facade that race relations are not at tension, that people in the community have been treated, that for some reason there hasn't been a connection between what happened in the past and what's happening now. So we owe it to ourselves, ladies and gentlemen. I do a lot of activist work in the community. I do have some pamphlets and some handouts over on the back table in regards to what racial profiling is, what it looks like. just a trifold of knowing your rights, just basic ways to interact with law enforcement, what you can and what you have as an appointed right is just being a community member, so please pick those up. We also have profiling hotline cards over there, which we use to document police misconduct to all degrees. If you feel like you've been negatively impacted by police or profiled or are a victim of mistreatment, please contact the line. It's toll free, and we will assist you by any means we can. Thank you.
Okay, I think we're getting another microphone. I saw it moving around. Oh yeah, right next to me. But before we move into Q&A, I just want to take an opportunity. There are amazing people in this room, and you all don't know each other. So I want you to take a moment, and this is uncomfortable for people sometimes, but to introduce yourself to the person next to you if you don't know them. And if you know the person next to you, to turn around and introduce yourself to them. Just take a moment to do that, because there's really a lot of incredible people in this room that should know each other.
I'll say hi.
Nicole, hi,
Nicole,
nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. Glad you came today. You go to school here?
I'm a professor at CCDU Metro.
All right on.
How about you?
I'm an engineer for University of Colorado. Do aerospace work. Involved with foreclosure resistance here in Denver. And I know
Very
a lot
separate
of these characters.
things.
Yeah. Talk about bifurcation. Yeah. What do you teach?
Composition. And then I brought some students with me today.
All right on. Should be some good subject material.
We'll see on Monday.
Very good.